In 1982, Poltergeist hit movie screens and managed to capture the imagination and tap into the deepest fears of audiences the world over. Now, 25 years later, this landmark film is still doing just that and introducing new generations of movie lovers to an experience elevated by both an intimate portrait of a regular suburban family and a grandiose rendering of the supernatural chaos that surrounds them. Michael Grais was called upon to script this legendary film, and he later went on to write and produce the first sequel as well, in a remarkably versatile career that has resulted in worldwide acclaim and gross revenues of more than $500 million. Mr. Grais has proven himself as a master of all genres. His additional credits include a variety of television work for classic shows like Kojak and Beretta, writing credits for films like Marked for Death and Cool World, and producing duties on terrific films like Great Balls of Fire, Sleepwalkers, and Who Killed Atlanta's Children. It is a great pleasure to welcome to the show writer, producer, and director, Mr. Michael Grais. Mr. Grais, are you with us?
I'm with you.
Thank you so much for calling in tonight and being a part of this. We're very excited to speak with you tonight.
I'm happy to be talking to you, too.
I'm
happy to be talking to anybody.
Okay.
Yeah, you talked about how old you guys were when Poltergeist came out. I just want you to know, Stephen got me out of kindergarten to write this, and I was really honored.
Wow, you were quite a writer really early, weren't you?
Yeah, I was a prodigy.
Yeah.
They more than a prodigy, that's for sure.
So tell me a little bit about how you broke into the business. I know you wrote for some pretty legendary television shows early on.
My first job was with Beretta.
Yeah. And
the way I got that job was I'd been in town for almost exactly a year, and I knew Beretta's assistant, and she got me a treatment for what they loosely called a approved story. So I was going to write a teleplay on spec for the show, just to show that I could write it. I read this treatment, and it was so bad that I wrote a 3 or 4 page synopsis of why it should never get made. It made its way to Robert Blake, who, being Robert Blake, thought it was terrific.
Really?
I got a call, and the phone rang one night, and it was about 10 o'clock at night. I was sitting there drinking scotch, being a writer, and they said, "Will you come down to the set at Universal? Mr. Blake wants to speak to you." And I thought, oh, God, I'm in trouble. So I went down there, got into his trailer. They ushered me into his trailer while he was finishing doing a scene. And he came in, and he sat down and says, "I like what you wrote, kid. What do you want to do?" So I said, "Well, I've never written an episode of a television series before, so I should probably start by rewriting." And he said, "Fine. I'll have you rewriting by next week." And I left and thought, well, that's the last I'll hear of him,
Right.
There was just a moment in time. But indeed, I got a call the following week and was called in to rewrite a show. And I spent a day and a half with the producers of the show and the director of that episode, and taking notes and discussing the script, etc. And then at the end of that, I asked the executive producer when they wanted it, and he said tomorrow. So I wrote all night, and I write by longhand. I don't type, or don't work on a computer either.
Oh, you still work that way?
Yeah, I do.
Wow.
I just can't think when I'm staring at the screen.
Yeah.
So I wrote long, on yellow legal pads the way I do now, and it came up, and it was the right number of pages, and they liked it, and so from that moment on, I was the rewrite guy over there.
Huh. They say that, I've heard it said that television is the writer's medium. Do you find that to be true?
Yes, it is. The writer has more, I don't know if you want to call it power, whatever, powers. I don't know, in Hollywood, I don't know, when Sumner Redstone is calling Steven Spielberg inconsequential, you wonder what power is. So, but you do have more say over the words that you've written in television than you do in movies.
Yeah. It seems that way. I've heard a lot of writers attest to that. So tell me how Spielberg came across your work and came to offer you the First of all, he offered you writing duties on his remake of A Guy Named Joe, which eventually became Always, right?
Yes, that's right.
How did that occur?
He read two scripts that me and my ex-partner had written. One was what turned into the movie called Death Hunt with Charles Bronson, Lee Marvin, Andrew Higgins.
Cool. That's a wonderful movie.
Thank you. Which was really kind of our ode to Jack London. And then he read another script that we wrote called Turn Left or Die, which was about air traffic controllers. It was a comedy, black comedy. And he thought, well, okay, now they can write this action kind of terrifying, manhunt movie, and they can write this comedy, and I'll put that together, and they can write a guy named Joe. So I went over to his house, and he, invited us over, and we went over there, and he screened A Guy Named Joe, and then he started after we saw it, he started talking about this movie that he wanted to do, this scary movie that he wanted to do, this ghost story. And so the next day, we called him up and said, we really love the fact that you're asking us to do this Guy Named Joe thing, but we really dig that story about the ghost. I mean, I don't know how many people have ever done that with him.
Yeah.
But he said, okay, he says, I'm negotiating a deal with a writer that I don't think will work out, so let me finish that up and see how that goes, and then I'll get back to you. And he got back to us within 48 hours and said, you guys got the job.
Oh, goodness. So what excited you about the prospect of doing this type of supernatural story?
Well, what really made it different than the other movies, and the way he was speaking about it, was that it was like Close Encounters. It was going to have a spiritual aspect to it.
Yeah.
And it was going to take place not in a haunted house, but in a suburban housing development. Just that the ghost was going to come out of the television. That was about it. That alone just completely intrigued us.
Mm.
So
in the story point, because Spielberg gets story credit. So I'm just curious, what were kind of the initial key beats, or did he have key, elements or key sequences that this is something he had in his head from day one, and then y'all worked around it, or was it just an ongoing process of It
was an ongoing process. Pretty much what I told you was what he had in mind.
Really?
What he had on paper.
Yeah.
It was at that time, I think he called it nighttime. And the basic beats were that the ghosts would come out of the TV, that it would be set in a housing, suburban housing thing, and it'd be a typical suburban Spielberg family.
Right.
So was it through research that or just the evolvingness of the writing that not only did the paranormal experts come in, but also the you could say the cleaner of the house, that the main in the second half when she comes in to clean the house, were those two things through research, or was that just, we need to bring experts in? How did that come about in the story? Cause that's
remember, I think the cleaners, was Stephen's idea, and then I think the little lady the psychic was my idea.
Okay.
Because I had been involved in that, just interested in that for a long time.
Yeah. Obviously, Spielberg, I would imagine, was very closely involved in every aspect of it, and that would include the writing phase, I'm sure.
Yes.
What kind of collaborator is Spielberg?
Interesting. He was doing E.T., as you guys were talking about.
Yeah.
So he didn't have a lot of time to spend on the script while we were doing it. We met in the cafeteria at MGM, three times a week. He would have read what we wrote, and he'd give us notes on that. And then after we did the first draft, then he did a polish and draft, and that was it. We were about to go on strike, which was interesting.
Yeah.
So we ended up picketing our own movie, which was an interesting experience as well. So there was no time to waste. And the other thing you were mentioning that E.T. it was the summer of E.T. and Stephen thought that E.T. wasn't going to be successful.
Well, that turned out to be very wrong.
Oops. So he was really nervous about Poltergeist. I mean, he was nervous that he thought, well, this is a sure thing. But E.T. he says, I don't know what the audience is for that. I just don't know. I saw it, I thought it was just fantastic, and it would be, what it became.
So I'm curious, did he show you, usually he'll show writers or people his, what he's working on. So did he show you E.T. before, it came out, and did you have an idea that it was going to be a hit, even though he was concerned?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, he showed it to us, and we told him, it's a monster. This is a monster hit. This is going to get everybody. I mean, everyone's going to have tears in their eyes and be laughing all at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. They talk about demographics and all of that. E.T. is basically for everyone who's breathing on the planet.
Yeah.
It covered all the bases.
Yeah.
It was a terrific movie.
Now tell me about writing a film like Poltergeist. Is there a different discipline to an approach to writing a scary picture? And can you tell it's scary on the page? Because I know when it comes to comedies, I hear a lot of comedians say that if a script reads funny, then that's probably the death of the film.
Well, I had never written a horror script or a terror script, whatever you want to call it, before. And what I knew was that the characters worked, and what I knew was that the scares were scary, but on the page.
Right.
So, but I didn't see any of it being filmed at the premiere. Well, at the premiere, they had a little screening before the premiere, and I came a little late, and so I was in like the front row of a real small theater, and I started watching this movie. I ran out of the theater. I was scared.
Oh, it's frightening.
Oh well, the guy that wrote the film was frightened by it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was scared because I had never seen. I didn't know about these special effects. I didn't know they were gonna be so good.
Yeah. Oh, it did a number on me too. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we all got kind of zapped by that one. So.
So how you weren't close to the production phase of it at all?
No, we were. As I said, we were on strike. We were picketing. And so we were actually, Stephen was kind enough to send. When we were picketing MGM while they were shooting Poltergeist, Stephen was kind enough to send an assistant out to get us off the picket line so we could at least come in and see one set.
Yeah.
And it was cool because that was the set that Joe Beth got. They've had her bedroom on a gimbal. That's the thing that turns the bedroom upside down.
Right.
In that scene where the ghost pulls her around the room. So we saw that set and that scene being set up, and then we had to go back outside and pick it some more.
Well, I got a writer's question,
Sure.
Because Poltergeist has has a few, I guess you could say, catchphrases, famous lines.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious of where did they come from, or was it improv that when you saw the film, like, oh, okay, that was that. Obviously, they're here and don't go into the light. I mean, were those in the script? And
yes, they were in the script.
Did you have any inkling that these might become like key lines that are quoted to this day?
No.
I mean, to the point that they're here became, I guess you could say, the advertising line for the sequel, which was "They're back." Which was,
it's become pop culture.
Becoming the lexicon of it.
Yeah, which became the advertising for everything from Chevrolets to whatever.
Yeah, and you really can't
that.
You really can't predict what'll catch on like that, can you?
No, you can't.
No one knows anything.
No. That's right. You don't know. You don't know what people are going to like or not like. In terms of a movie like Poltergeist, though, I mean, you have a built-in audience for terror.
Right.
And for action, different thing, love stories, action.
So why do you think it survived as it has 25 years later?
I don't think it's. I think it's unlike any. It's not like anything was ever done before, or I haven't seen anything like it since.
Yeah.
That mixes the elements of a real family with humor. We actually structured the first act to be comedic. I mean, if you just look at the first act and forget about what happens in the second and third act, it's a family comedy.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. You're right. Absolutely.
And which completely disarms the audience. They're thinking, well, what's this going to be? Well, it's Steven Spielberg. I guess it's going to be light.
When that tree scene sets in, though, it all changes.
But that's what's wonderful. You're talking about the first act of the movie, and that first segment, you really get invested in the family as a family you really care for. And I think it's also a great touch that when the first phenomenons begin to occur, she's very excited and delighted by it.
Yeah, they think it's going to be. Well, she thinks it's going to be mind expanding kind of thing. It's going to be happy, and it turns out obviously not
so happy.
I have an interesting story. That tree thing it was brought into the script because something like that happened to me when I was a kid. Not that a tree came in and grabbed me, but when I was about 10, about a year before Stephen found me. I
love this guy.
I was left alone in my house. I grew up in Illinois, and I was left alone in the house while my parents were out, and then I took a nap or something, and I woke up, and my sisters weren't there, and no one was there, so they had gone out, and so I was just panicking, and there was a storm outside, and I'm sitting on the steps of my front steps of my house, not the outside, the inside, the stairway upstairs, and a tree limb comes smashing through the storm windows and the window. Mm. Well, there has never been a more frightened 11-year-old that you can.
I can imagine. Oh my God!
That was so. When I told we sat around and we talked about things that scared us when we were kids.
Right.
Those became the pieces. That became the scary pieces in the movie.
Well, I have a couple of questions for you about the Poltergeist 2, and then I want to hear what you're up to now. But when you're approached to do the sequel, were you at all apprehensive?
No, not at all. No, I wasn't apprehensive at all.
Well, that answers that question.
No, I was excited to do it. But basically, I said, well, knowing how much they wanted it, and they wanted us to do it, and Stephen kind of gave us the stamp of approval to do it. Said, well, if you want us to do it, we want to produce it. And they said, okay, well, if you're going to produce it, you're going to suffer on this deal. Which is, fair enough. Okay, we're giving you the possibility of a career boost, entering a new career with a big movie.
Right.
So we'll take it out of your hide, kind of thing. So we learned. It was great.
What kind of ideas were you trying to mine with that sequel?
Well, basically first we had to talk the cast into coming back. They weren't signed to do the sequel. So we had to go around and talk Joe Beth and Craig, who had, they had careers going.
Yeah.
From the success of Poltergeist. And they, at that time, sequels weren't a big, weren't hot on anyone's list of things to do in terms of, they didn't make the kind of money that they make now, where it seems like the sequels make more money than the originals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. At that time, that wasn't true. And so we had to do some real, maneuvering in terms of blending the script to what they were interested in at the time, what was going through their minds.
Yeah.
And so it came about through discussions with Craig and Joe Beth, and one of those discussions was Craig had been living up in Mount Shasta and had met an old Indian shaman, and he was just telling us stories about the shaman and how fascinated he was with this guy, and so that became a major part of the film.
Mm.
And Joe Beth had just had her grandmother, I think, had just passed away, and so she was kind of still grieving for that, and so we had that death of her mother.
Right.
And so that when we told them, we fed the story, once we'd come up with the story, fed it back to them and had incorporated these elements into it, they were very excited about doing it, and then they joined on. They came on.
I got 2 questions for you about Poltergeist 2.
Sure.
First of all, the concept of the character of Kane, brilliantly played by Julian Beck, and his importance as an actor cannot be understated. He began the Living Theater, and that was a very influential group, and he was a very influential figure in the acting community. But I heard that the concept of that character was originally drawn as a Jim Jones type?
Yes, that's right. Jim Jones was we figured we'll do a Jim Jones from the past,
right.
From the original Jim Jones. But yeah, that had just happened not so long before Poltergeist 2, and it was fresh in everyone's mind, the horror of that.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And another interesting thing about Julian was he wasn't insurable because he was ill.
Right.
And we wanted him so bad, and the director wanted him so bad, that we said, well, we'll put up our salaries for his insurance.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the last thing that he ever did.
Yeah. And one of the best things about that film, that's just absolutely spooky, and just a great performance that he gave. The second thing I had to ask about Poltergeist 2, where in the hell did you get the idea for that worm?
Well, having drunk a lot of tequila myself, I knew what it did to me. So so that's how it got in the film, actually.
That was an H.R. Geiger. Didn't he do the worm?
Yeah, H.R. Geiger did the worm, and we had a Vietnam vet named Noble Craig, who was when the worm grew and became that hideous thing under the bed.
The vomit creature.
The vomit creature, yeah. That was a gentleman who had one arm and no legs, and fit into this suit that that was created by HR for him. And this guy was unbelievable. He was such a bright spirit. And if you ever thought of feeling sorry for this guy, his wife and baby came to the set, and she looked like Marilyn Monroe.
Oh my God!
So there was no more feeling sorry for him after that.
Now, can you speak to this so-called poltergeist curse? Do you put much stock into that whole theory?
No, I don't. Julian was really dying when we hired him. I mean, he was sick, and what's his name? Wills was had lung disease from working in the mines. So he was, that was his Achilles heel, and he did, I don't know, 2 or 3 movies after that.
Yeah.
And the little girl had the little girl, not the girl that died in the first movie, which was just all of it was tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, the little kids dying was tragic. The first girl, I don't know anyone get
Heather O'Rourke, yeah.
Yeah, Heather O'Rourke. But
even so, I heard that the set of that second film was a little eerie. I think Will Sampson at one point performed a ritual on the set.
Yeah, that was really interesting. We had the underground cave that Kane was exhorting his people to, basically drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. And
we had brought in all these skeletons, and we thought they were all plastic, but it turned out that some of them were skeletons.
Oh, God.
So I was sitting next. Will was sitting there while we were watching people slide off this mountain, that was on the set, and literally the camera slid off the mountain at one point. We couldn't shoot, and Will is just sitting there, kind of like, So I looked over at him and I said, this guy knows. So I went and sat down next to him. I said, Will, what's going on? He goes, skeleton's not happy.
Uh-oh.
I said, really? I said, is there anything you could do about it? He goes, yeah, leave the door open for me tonight. Tell the guard at the gate to let me in, and I'll take care of it.
Huh.
And he came in that night, and the next day everything was fine.
Wow.
So
it's like he sounds almost like someone who works for the mafia. Like, I'll take care of it.
yeah, I know. He was kind of like the shaman, I'll take care of it guy.
Yeah.
He was a shaman for 3 different tribes.
So what is this news I see that there's another Poltergeist in development that you're attached to?
I don't know where this. I wrote a treatment for what could become a Poltergeist 3 movie, and it just kind of caught on that all these people think that I'm doing it, but MGM hasn't hired me to write it, so I don't know what it's with it.
So you don't know the status of it at all, or it's just
no.
Okay.
I really don't, and
Well, you have some. I want to ask about one other past film that you produced, and it's a film that I've always really liked. It's kind of my underrated treasures, and that's Great Balls of Fire.
Oh yes, I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, I love that movie. It's so much fun. Tell me about your experiences on that film. What comes to mind?
Well, I met Dennis Quaid just a few months ago in a restaurant in L.A. We were talking to him about doing something else, and the other people involved were sitting at the table, and I came in again late, and I was walking up, and he looks at me, and he's squinting at me, and he's going, Who is that guy? And he says, I know you from somewhere. I said, Great Balls of Fire. And he just ducked his head and said, wasn't one of my best days.
Oh, really?
he had taken on, he was a character actor, and he just got drunk and stayed drunk, a bit like Jerry Lee. Jerry Lee was one of the scariest guys I'd ever met.
Right.
And Dennis was right up there with him during the shooting.
Now, I read a rumor, and I read this so long ago, and it was just in passing, but I read that Terrence Malick did some work on that film.
Yeah, Terrence Malick did what the film that we envisioned, which was basically the raging bull of rock and roll.
Yeah.
And he did a terrific script, but the studio didn't want to shoot that script.
Goodness. Well, for the record, I know it's a film that's blasted here and there, but I love it. I've always had a great time with it.
I think I understand. I know how it through development it kind of got some would say watered down, but I think as it is now, it almost plays like the spirit of those actual 1950s juvenile delinquent rock and roll music.
Right, that's a good point.
And on that level, I think it's a lot of fun.
I like it more now than I did then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just think now I think it's really a joy to watch. Mm-hmm. At the time, I thought, I really like Terrence's version better.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But
so let's talk about something new that you've written. I saw it in Variety magazine. They announced the project that you're writing and producing. I believe it's called Home Before Daylight.
Yeah, that's the Steve Parrish was the roadie for the Grateful Dead for 35 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
He wrote the novel, his memoirs, Home Before Daylight, and I'm doing the adaptation and writing and producing it. Yeah.
So how much has the Grateful Dead meant to you throughout your life, and how exciting is it to get this project off the ground as a fan? I take it.
When I was at NYU, I was also working at the Fillmore East, and so I heard all the great bands, and was one of the things that bonded Steve and I together was he was there a night backstage where I was out front being an usher telling people to put out their marijuana cigarettes.
Right.
And what I remember about that night was the Grateful Dead played the entire night. They played until dawn.
Mm.
They also dosed the water with LSD. So there were a lot of employees were not in their best shape that night. But I kind of like their improvisational style.
Yeah.
I liked it. Was kind of like the jazz of rock and roll.
Yeah, it really was. You're right.
It was interesting. It was different than anything else that was going on, and certainly the people that were following them, and the pop culture that surrounded them was different than anything I had seen either. And I had been around all the groups, and the Who, Jimi Hendrix, the Doors, everybody, and the Grateful Dead had a more bizarre and interestingly bizarre group of people around them than anyone did.
Yeah. So I know you also recently directed your own short film called Lakeshore Drive.
Right.
How did you take to directing? Is it something you want to return to again?
No. I think after directing that, I realized that I'd rather not to be a director. I really enjoyed the process. It was good. It was a good experience, but I just think that there's people who are better at it than I am, and I'd rather have them do it.
Right.
I also am doing a project based on Tim McGraw's hit song "Live Like You Were Dying" for Daybreak Productions, Chuck Gordon's company.
Yeah, is that you're adapting a film from a song essentially, or?
I'm doing it. I wrote a story inspired by the song.
Right.
And I'm going to write the screenplay of that.
Oh wow. Well, you have some exciting projects coming up, and we're looking forward to all of them. And we can't thank you enough for spending this much time with us tonight.
Oh, it's a joy. You guys are great.